All the great players are light players. If you watch a really great player, you'll notice how effortless their playing looks. And that's not a coincidence. Their playing looks effortless because it feels effortless to them, even when they're playing the most difficult passages. Now, this doesn't mean that it doesn't take a lot of hard work to get to that point, but the end result of virtuosic playing is that it feels effortless to do. But before we get into more, I'm David. I've been playing the violin for 20 years, teaching for over 10, and making tutorials online for over 8 years now. I studied the Dounis Method, and this method is focused on teaching players to play using their natural instincts, which is what these great players use, and it's why their playing looks so natural and effortless. If someone was to ask you to simply imitate the motions of violin playing in the air, it would feel effortless to do. And that's because you're not being restricted by any of the conditioned reflexes you may have developed. When you play in the air, you revert back to your natural instincts, and for the most part, this allows you to follow your body's natural line of motion. Now, while this may seem very simple, the idea here is to maintain your body's natural line of motion like you have when you play in the air, when you actually play normally. This is essentially what the great players do, and it's what allows their playing to look effortless, in the same way that your playing looks and feels effortless when you're just playing in the air. Now, the process of getting to this point might take some work, and depending on how many conditioned reflexes you have, or in other words, bad habits that you've developed in your playing, this may take longer to do. In my own experience, I had a lot of bad habits which I had developed. These made my playing feel unnatural, especially when I compared it to my playing in the air. I had to go through one by one and eliminate those bad habits by replacing them with a natural instinct. For example, in my vibrato, I had developed the habit of pumping the vibrato back and forth. This meant that I was never releasing the vibrato, and as a result, it felt, sounded, and looked forced. But if you revert back to the natural instinct of just feeling that your hand is effortlessly shaking in the air, you'll notice how much easier it feels to do the vibrato. And not only that, it'll sound and look much more natural. In this case, one of the Dounis exercises that helped me get the feeling of releasing my vibrato was the keys exercise. Take a pair of keys, place it in your left hand, and jingle it back and forth. As you do, you should notice that even though your hand is moving quickly back and forth, it doesn't feel tense. And that's because you're doing it in a released motion. In other words, you're not pumping your hand back and forth. Then you maintain that feeling in your left hand as you go back to vibrating normally on the violin. And it helps to go back and forth between vibrating on the violin and doing the exercise so that you never forget the feeling of that released vibrato. Now, this is just one of many Dounis exercises that focuses on teaching you how to go back to using your natural instincts to doing a technique. There's many more of these, and in fact, there's an exercise to cover pretty much any technique you can imagine. And that's what makes this method so effective for learning to play with your natural instincts, which is what all these great players do. Now, to go back to the concept of light playing. When you watch these great players and they appear to be playing very lightly, it's not only that they're using their natural instincts, it's also that they're releasing their impulses in their playing. This is a concept that applies to every musical instrument, not just the violin. The great players all have a very strong intuitive understanding of impulsing and releasing. And this doesn't just apply to mechanical techniques like the vibrato. It applies to musical phrasing, and especially to fast playing. When you're playing fast, you don't play every note with the same emphasis. In fact, you're only really emphasizing a few notes and releasing the others. That's why when you watch a great player play fast, it also seems effortless, even though they're playing so many notes and doing it so quickly. If you find that when you try to do the same, your playing feels stuck, or in other words, it doesn't feel light, it's because you're trying to emphasize too many notes. You're not impulsing and releasing. To get the feeling for impulsing and releasing into your playing, you have to first identify the notes that need to be impulsed. In a very simple example in a fast passage, the impulse notes will be on the first notes of the group. Then all the other notes should be felt as released. The difference between these two types of notes is not only in dynamics, but it's in how you actually feel them. You feel the impulse notes as being louder and typically a bit longer, and the other notes you feel as being released, quieter, and sometimes they even rush a bit. Now, if you're someone that's not really familiar with this concept, this may sound very strange, as when we're taught to play fast, we're often taught to start slow and incrementally speed up the notes. But unless you have a very intuitive understanding on how to switch from slow playing to fast playing, You'll maintain that habit of emphasizing all the notes the same when you try to play fast. As a result, your playing won't look, sound, or feel effortless. Instead, what you should do is practice something like this. Take a fast group of notes and focus on impulsing just the first note. Then put a break between that and all the other notes. Then play all the other notes very quietly, released, and even allow them to move a bit. As you do this, feel that the momentum for these release notes comes from the impulse note. Then, gradually shorten that break. You should feel that even though you're still emphasizing that impulse note, the other notes feel released, and you're not really thinking about playing them, even though you are. Now, of course, this type of practice should only really be done after you actually know the notes. But after you do really know the notes, it's more helpful to actually go straight into practicing them like this, and to practice them slowly and to gradually speed up the tempo. Now, these are still just a few examples of how the great players are able to make their playing look, sound, and feel light. There's other aspects to this too, and that's what the Dounis Method, which I've been studying, focuses on. And as someone who used to not play with their natural instincts, and had no idea on how to be a light player, I found that over the years, all these things add up, and it makes more and more sense how the great players are able to play at the level that they do. If you're interested in learning more, check out the resources below, including my free ebook.